Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar. Just to give some time time for the people that couldn't join us exactly at 2 o'clock to join, we'd like to give everyone just another minute. So please bear with us. Okay, well, that minute went by very, very quickly. So let's kick this off. As I said, it's great to have everyone online this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. My name's Jason Good. I'm from IC Consult, and I'm joined this afternoon by my colleague at Semperis, Guido Grillmeier, who is a principal technologist. And Guido will be talking you through the technology that we're presenting this afternoon, and also taking you through the value proposition associated with Semperis. But before we get there, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about IC Consult. So if we could move to the next slide. Great. So we like to say that we stand out from the crowd. And the reason we like to say that is because we've completed more than 2,000 identity and access management projects worldwide. We are considered by organizations like Gartner and KuppingerCole being one of the world's leading consultancy and systems integrators. And we probably have more than any other organization globally dedicated and focused on identity and access management. So my colleagues, there are nearly 900 of us worldwide. All we do every day and have been doing for nearly 30 years, believe it or not, delivering identity and access management projects. Over the years, we've developed our solution portfolio, and I'm very happy that we have Semperis speaking with us today, because as you'll see, Semperis are solving some real world challenges that we're seeing today. So even though we've been doing this for nearly 30 years, we're keeping up with the technology. Have a look at us on Gartner, and we've completed, as I said, nearly 2,000 projects, and we've done that and we've won awards for Schenker, Swisscom, Siemens, and many, many others. So if we switch to the next slide. And we are where you are. Our heritage is German. We started the organization back in 1997. And as you can imagine, as a German organization, there's a huge attention to detail. And that's why with identity and access management, it's all about the attention to detail. But over time, we've obviously expanded, and we cover all of Europe, we cover North America, and for some of our larger clients, we also deliver services for them in China. And if you're interested in how we can do that, then after this call, we can talk to you about that a little bit more. But what that gives us is the opportunity to offer not only onshore, but also near and offshore capability as well. So next slide, please. So wherever you are in your identity and access management journey, you can speak to IC Consult. If you're thinking about what to do next, so you've done some identity management, you've delivered single sign-on, you've delivered multi-factor authentication, but you're worried about DORA or you're worried about NIS2, we can support you around the advisory business consulting element. We can help you put together RFPs, go-to-market strategies, IAM life cycles, roadmaps. We have experience in all of that. But if you have technology and you'd like to understand how to fit all of these different pieces of identity and access management, IGA, PAM, and I know I'm using a lot of acronyms, but they're all very important, how to architect that through to implementation, and then even taking that off your hands and delivering support and operations. And that can be 7x8. It can also be 24x7. That's completely up to you. So in terms of our portfolio, as I said, business and strategy, all the way through from advisory through to we're focusing on identity orchestration, decentralized identity. So if you're thinking about how those elements can add value to your business, you can talk to us. IT security, and that list, over time has just grown and grown and grown in terms of the elements that need to be taken under consideration. We're talking about Internet of Things, identity, API security, multi-factor authentication, and then how do you then manage that if you've got privileged access management, SIEM, and how all of these elements fit together. And we can wrap all of that into a managed service for you. So I think the next slide. So as I said, it's a pleasure to have Guido with me this afternoon. I'm glad I got your title right. You are a principal technologist. And
Absolutely.
what I'd love to do is to ask you a couple of questions up front, if you don't mind, just to set the scene. But what are the most common vulnerabilities in Active Directory that make it such an easy target for attackers? And let's face it, probably 100% of the people on this call have Active Directory in production somewhere in their business. If not, it is the main identity provider for their business. And then, how does the age of Active Directory contribute to its susceptibility to modern cyber attacks? And don't have to answer those questions directly now, but when you're going through the presentation,
They're great
I think.
questions, Jason. First of all, thanks to you and everyone at IC Consult for having us for this webinar. Always a pleasure to work with you. We've done quite a few of these in different regions. And the topic, like you say, is a hot topic because everyone, if they want it or not, that's the point, is most likely still using Microsoft Active Directory. Active Directory has been and still is the most distributed software from Microsoft. It's the most deployed feature function in Windows Server ever, because of course it's part of Windows Server. It's not a separate application that you buy. It's a core element of the identity security system that was born a quarter of a century ago, 25 years ago, more or less. Now, February, was it 14th? I think it was February 14th, February 18th, 2000 was the birthday, the official one, of course. Bits and pieces were available earlier, but the general release date was in February of the year 2000, and we're February of the year 2025, and that is a quarter of a century later. And Microsoft has been amazingly good at solving a core problem that companies have had with having multiple segregated directories all around that plenty of people needed to manage, down to, well, for many companies it was the first global project that they had to have a centralized identity store, combined with new capabilities that we back then wanted on the collaboration front with Microsoft Exchange. They pushed AD forward because the new version of Microsoft Exchange 2000 back then, required to be hosted on or in a domain that ran Windows Active Directory services and no longer the Windows NT domains. If I'm sure quite a few of our listeners will have been part of those days. So that's why basically most companies now just switch to the next pieces of the presentation, because I'll be answering a lot of what you just asked throughout the presentation. As, like you say, it's a topic of interest and concern to many companies, that they still have that dependency on Active Directory, if they want it or not, because it's actually not because somebody wants AD or doesn't want AD. Most companies these days are in this hybrid landscape, that everybody wants to move to the cloud. Actually, I shouldn't say everybody, but many and most companies. But there are still elements that you either want to keep offline and or at least self-hosted in your environment, think of infrastructure for factories that is piece by piece also going online with smart factories that are managed in different ways. But a lot of those are highly segregated networks that don't allow themselves to great cloud connectivity. But the office workspace, yeah, I just said Office, and that doesn't only mean Microsoft Office, but for many people, it's at least a tool, Microsoft Office, that they use to run their Office workloads. And that has moved into the cloud. And with it, it also pushed a lot of customers to use Office 365. Yeah, we're using GoToWebinar now, but there's other tools. Of course, Teams is being used. I couldn't tell percentages, but to many in many companies, certainly those that have built on the Office suite, and that is the majority of most companies. And so, if they wanted it or not, the next step was to go into the cloud and manage a Microsoft Entra tenant, even though they hadn't necessarily realized that when you have Office 365, you need an identity store in the cloud. And that's what this picture is showing. It often comes from your core directory services still on-prem. Active Directory for the majority of companies is the leading identity directory. Newer, or let's say segments of companies, are then managed in a way. Think of your consulting people or other external users that don't need access to some legacy business applications, but maybe just the modern apps. You can have those as native users in the cloud. But for a lot of companies, there are certain applications, and it's always the apps that keep you in that on-prem Active Directory. I'm going to call it legacy Active Directory user space. And that's why we also say that that's why it's sort of, if AD isn't secure, nothing is, because intruders do go after your weakest link in your security chain. Yeah, that's a given. Yeah, that's what we all know, and it's not just us who say that. I think that's also important to highlight. Just recently, this was September 2024, like it actually says here on the screenshot. The Five Eyes report from the Australian government, Canada, US, New Zealand, and England. They highlighted the fact that companies, and these are actually institutions that wouldn't typically look at old technology, yeah. But when they realize that it is a piece of old technology that is very much distributed and in use in companies, they do give out warnings, because the increase of attacks to take down companies often come through that weakest link, through Active Directory. And so this is a very worthwhile read. The Detecting and Migrating Active Directory Compromises, that white paper. I forgot to check the number of pages right now. I also didn't read all the pages, but it's absolutely worthwhile to read. And I've definitely checked out it. They have a nice overview of all the different attack types. They describe them, they explain them, they explain how you can detect them and what you can do to protect yourself. A little bit of an overlap, a good overlap with this webinar, because we're going to highlight quite a few of those as well. And we're even going to use a tool that they also highlight in their report. As you can see here, Purple Knight, one of our free tools from Semperis, to get to know the security vulnerability or the security landscape of an identity environment. And that's why we're actually quite proud, of course, to be mentioned on that report, no doubt. Semperis has now been around for well over 10 years. Purple Knight has been around for three and a half years, yeah, and its use has exploded, yeah, because it's very easy to use, and it helps people understand what are the weaknesses in my Active Directory environment. And I'm going to move on to a slide where I deliberately want to start, high level, with getting that understanding. And Jason, you had a question here, right?
Yeah, I do, and I hope you don't mind that
No.
just as I think of questions, I'd be okay if I could ask them. So, how does a zero trust model integrate with Active Directory, and why is that crucial for hybrid identity systems?
And that's exactly what I'm trying to show on the slide, because what does zero trust actually mean? Zero trust means that you don't trust your devices or your users just by plain, let's say, username and password at one time log on. You recheck whatever a user does and basically validate that he really is who he is, depending on what access he's trying to get to, what type of resource he's using, and you recheck his credentials, ideally through multi-factor authentication, which wasn't built in an on-prem Active Directory. But as we see here, on-prem Active Directory, like I've already mentioned, is also the piece that syncs your identities to the cloud. And if you don't enable MFA, and if you don't have a good conditional access policies defined that then invoke and, let's say, implement the zero trust capabilities of the cloud, um, then you're making a mistake. There is no real zero trust in the on-prem world. You log on once and then you have a token, and yes, that does have some expiry, but technically anybody that has your token can do a lot of activities in that on-prem world, because basically when you log on, that's a big piece of what AD is there for, the authentication part in the on-prem world. Many companies still have domain joined machines. Most would move into cloud joined devices these days, and basically do the whole authentication, the primary authentication of a work machine against the cloud, and then only re-authenticate against the on-prem Active Directory when you do use a legacy application. But I couldn't tell you how many, where we are. Are we 50-50, or are we 60-40, or 30-70? Wherever we are, we're on that road of moving to the cloud, and plenty of companies are still utilizing this mechanism. And
Yeah.
for your domain joined servers, you obviously have the authentication also of those devices
Mhm.
against the on-prem Active Directory. And then, of course, with the tokens that you have from your authorization, or from your authentication, you're authorized against the various resources in your environment, files, data, apps, specifically, of course, business apps. A lot of the file services is a totally mixed world in many companies. You want to get rid of classic file services, but OneDrive and SharePoint doesn't replace everything, especially for some legacy applications. So you still need them, etc. So and SQL databases and whatnot. Yeah. So, but like you just highlighted, from that zero trust perspective, it's this binding, the cloud synchronization between the on-prem Active Directory and the cloud directory Entra, that makes it vulnerable at that zero trust level through the connectivity to on-prem AD. Now, mind you, that sync, of course, is performed by services, Entra Connect or Entra Cloud Sync, that are using specific identities to have access, and those are highly privileged access, both in the on-prem world and in the cloud world, and they are prime targets for intruders to also bridge between these environments to attack the one from the other. And Microsoft is aware of these activities happening, and that's why Microsoft is also investing quite a bit of money to improve the cloud sync. There is work going on. I can't say much more about that because it's still in progress. But there's good work going on to make that connection more secure. But let me also highlight why it's so easy in the on-prem world to attack the Active Directory. Like I said, weakest link, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this phases of a ransomware, but it's still good to get that overview. that, it's typically that classic initial access. That's actually basically a separate business from ransomware gangs that then sell their initial access. They're initial access brokers. Once they broke into your environment, they sell that access on platforms in the dark net. So they might not even be the guys that then attack you to the next step, but they've gotten in somehow through your VPN, through some stolen credentials, through whatever way, and even by misusing your device drivers. BYOVD is bring your own vulnerable driver. It's of course more good for the attacker than it is for you, because companies don't always update drivers properly. They might have a good hand at updating the Microsoft layer, but there's plenty of drivers that are not part of the Microsoft update ecosystem, and not everybody is keeping drivers basically safe. And so basically, once somebody is in, and be it through credentials or access that they required on the internet from that dark web, the next step is, of course, the recon phase, where they will have established a command and control system. That's a fancy name for just one PC potentially, and later multiple PCs that they have been successfully able to install some malware to, and then that is their machine of choice where they reconnect to and basically can check out the internal network. And AD is on the forefront of everything because it has access to all of your network server connected servers. It's like a map of your on-prem infrastructure for many. Also, the groups that are available in AD tell you what permissions to expect, what systems to expect. Is there HR data? Is there development data? And then where is that actually allowed? AD gives a lot of that. And so that's why you go after those vulnerabilities, you elevate your privileges to become a domain admin, and then you're in. Yeah. And that's basically the classic attack path of most attacks that we see these days. And that is why it is so important to give that identity protection a lot of focus in companies. And ideally, you want to not, you want to prevent any breach, but you also have to prepare for the worst. If you have been breached, how do you basically get out of that? Yeah. And what I first want to show, I think it makes sense to speak through this quickly because it's a bit technical, but I think it's still good for any listener and viewer to be aware of this. There's default weaknesses in Active Directory. And I've talked about this at different conferences, and I have some blogs on these issues, but people are not necessarily totally aware of them. And this is default read permissions. Read, not necessarily write. There's also issues with write permissions. But what does an intruder need at the beginning? Just needs to read information from Active Directory to do the reconnaissance, right? To find out where are the weak spots. And by default, and most of our listeners will have this in their environment, and they don't need it for AD to work, is that authenticated users, which is not only all your users in your forest, but also all the machines that are domain joined in the forest. They are authenticated users, and they have, by definition of their memberships in the pre-Windows 2000 compatible access group. Pre-Windows 2000 compatible means before Windows 2000 was released, means more than 25 years ago. These are permissions that are for Windows NT, and they basically mean that I have full read permissions through this group. If I'm a member, which everybody is, yeah, I have full read permissions on all your objects, all your groups, all your users, even the INAT.org person object type that basically nobody is using, but it's part of LDAP definition, which is why Microsoft implemented it. At the root of each of your domains, these permissions are set. And it basically translates to the fact that an intruder can easily find out weak accounts that are allowed to not have a password, what group memberships are, who is a domain admin in the first place, etc., etc. Yeah, and so plenty of reasons to actually remove that, which is not easily done, especially not on a Monday morning and not directly after this call. Yeah, people should. That's a plan that people need to have, because it scripts, default scripts, other tools, they in the meantime expect those rights to be there.
Mm.
Although nobody needs it for the system to work, you would need to replace it with, other accounts or machines in that group, and people can easily break their environment. The blog goes into much more details there. Another related one, and this one is one that can easily be fixed, is in the so-called admin SD holder. And again, don't want to make it too technical, but it's good to know that this exists. This is a special template permission, like it says, SD holder, security identifier holder, yeah, or security descriptor holder, I should say, for admins, yeah. And that is basically a template for permissions that the domain controller stamps on everybody that you make a domain admin or an account operator or an enterprise admin, whatever. And it has these two permissions in it again. There you see it, pre-Windows 2000 compatible access and authenticated user. That is absolutely not required now for the system to work, and that can easily be taken out without any of your business apps breaking. Yeah, some mostly AD monitoring or even management tools, they might again expect that permission can easily be granted separately. It's not difficulty. Well described, I hope, in that blog post, actually white paper, with the link here in the slides that we're going to share. Right, we're going to share the slides to our listeners. Yeah, and so the key thing is there is hardening to do, and even Microsoft realized this. Microsoft sort of asked the question, well, what do you want your AD to look like? These cute little doggies, yeah, or these dogs that really protect your AD, yeah. And this is I took the picture from a really cool blog post from Dagmar Heidegger from Microsoft. Worthwhile read, that tiering and protecting your AD is absolutely worthwhile to do just what we talked about: prevent an intruder from easily doing reconnaissance in your environment, and knowing who are your domain admins, who do I need to attack. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we're basically at our pre-attack phase from that NIST cyber security framework.
Okay.
And we're going to cover a bit.
So sorry, Guido. Love the picture of the dogs, by the way. Big dog lover here. Just taking perhaps a little bit of a step back, but how do you explain tools like Purple Knight? You mentioned it right at the beginning.
Yeah.
You also have a tool called Forest Druid.
Yeah.
Great names, certainly stick in the mind. How do they help in identifying and mitigating some of those AD vulnerabilities that you've spoken about?
Yeah, and they're exactly made for just that, and they are free tools. And I have a slide coming up that shows links to that too. But they are made for this so-called pre-attack phase. If we look at the NIST cyber security framework, that's basically what we're looking at here. That's the whole circle, and the initial part here, the IOE and IOC, which are indicators of exposure, indicator of compromise, discovery, and then the continuous security monitoring. But specifically that first part, the discovery of what are my weaknesses. That's what those tools help you to do, and they help you to do that in different ways. And we're going to come back to that circle in a minute, but I want to make sure that people understand that our tools are not the only tools on the market. Yeah, there's really good free vulnerability scanning tools out there on the market, and I don't hesitate to mention them either. Next to what we have with Purple Knight, there's Ping Castle, now part of Netrix, so not maybe a little bit more controlled than what it used to be. And next to what we have with Forest Druid, which is a graphical tool for attack path analysis and basically understanding my real tier zero. We're going to look at that in a bit more. There's Bloodhound that's known for years for especially red teams that try to get in to an AD environment. It's a very powerful tool, but it's also a bit more complicated to use. Yeah, the Forest Druid tool that also helps companies to understand where are relationships in my AD environment that might be risky. That's what an attack path is about. That is meant for the defenders. That's more easily digestible in how to actually find those relevant relationships, and that's why we say it's made for the defenders, and not to say that Bloodhound can't be used by the defenders, but they're mostly overwhelmed by that tool. It's a bit more complicated to use, very powerful nonetheless. Forest Druid is made to be a bit more easier to use, and again for free, and has absolutely no hurdle when it comes to first needing to install something. Yeah, because you run it right out of the box. Yeah, you both with Purple Knight and with Forest Druid, you basically download once you register for them, and those are the links here. You download a zip file. You unpack the zip file, you of course unblock it as you do when you download something from the net. You don't run it on a privileged system, you run it on an unprivileged system, of course, and then you execute the executable in the folder that you've just unpacked, and then you can either run Purple Knight or with the download of Forest Druid, that tool right away without any installation. Yeah, so it's very, very easy to use, and we're first going to have a look at a few more details of what Purple Knight finds as an example, and this can be a big list. And I was even thinking, should I demo it or not? But I thought it's actually quite okay to look at some screenshots. It's totally easy to use, like I've already mentioned, but to understand what type of information comes back, that's what we want to do here. The tool goes against Entra ID. Here in the screenshot I see is still an older one showing Azure AD, but everybody knows that. It's the same thing. And it's basically going against both worlds. Yeah, so you can check your weaknesses in Entra as well as in the on-prem AD. We've got something like 150 checks against both worlds, and a few that are actually like hybrid. Yeah, where like that initial one here at the top that says 80 privileged users that are synced to Azure AD. You should not sync your domain admins to Azure AD. You have to have separate native accounts in the cloud that manage your cloud. You don't sync privileged accounts. Yeah? So that's one of the initial and important warnings where we basically compare what you're actually doing in your environment. And then, of course, we give you more information to that. So for any of the checks that come up, there's like a read more element to it where you get this description. And let's have a quick look at this. This is a classic one that most companies will find: non-default principals with DC sync rights on the domain. Why would people find this typically? Well, because to do a synchronization between on-prem ID and Entra ID, there is an account, a service account, and you have it right here at the bottom, the My DOM MSOL account. That's through a default installation from the Azure AD Connect, Entra ID Connect tool. Most companies have deployed it that way and sort of went click, 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 next, 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 next. Some have pre-created their own service account, but no matter what, it has a whole lot of permissions in your environment. And the important one is this guy, DS replication get changes all. And that one allows that account or any other account like this one that I've highlighted here to basically use proper sync command, to read any of your objects out of AD, and the all part means including the hash of the password. That's how Entra ID can actually know what your password on-prem is, because your hash, which is then further hashed before it's then sent into the cloud, so it's double encrypted, but still that's how Microsoft can actually do log on with the same password in the cloud by syncing those passwords, which is actually recommended best practice to do. Yeah, so it's not like a bad thing. The reason why it's recommended is, first of all, it's easier for your users than having different passwords in the one area than the other one. But Microsoft is spending a ton of money. I don't know if it's daily or monthly, but certainly very often, to reap the dark net of stolen credentials, and then to check if your credentials have been breached, and then to tell you this password is out there in the wild. Yeah, and especially that user has been breached. So it's a good function that you wouldn't know about until you actually use that mechanism, besides having a high positive user impact. That's why everybody will see this. They'll get a warning, but the warning is important because it then starts. It should help users to realize, oh, that system that is being used for my syncing, that is a critical system. It actually belongs to your tier 0, and it should not be some PC sitting under the desk of just any office worker, or a server where just any, let's say, lower level server admin can administer the server. It's a tier 0 system that shall only be administered by a tier 0 admin, which is a domain admin. So that's ways that intruders elevate their privileges through these type of systems. That's why we keep that warning in there, that people realize that. And of course, you want to know if somebody else has those permissions too. I'm not going to explain all of these in the same level of detail, but another good example is computer accounts or even user accounts with unconstrained delegation. It's a Kerberos capability that allows the forwarding of anybody's token when there is, think of malware running on a PC, or actually it made it to a server, and then on that server, it just needs to wait, for maybe a domain admin to come by to log on, which they shouldn't if it's a lower level system, but people do, yeah. But if it's not a tier 0 system, your app service or whatnot, file service, an intruder might have made it there, and now that server, for reasons for some applications that might need it, that might need Kerberos delegation, could be SQL systems, could be some web servers and whatnot. That system with this configuration allows an intruder to easily forward any credentials to any other system in the environment. That's unconstrained delegation. The other option to use this and to configure it the right way is to at least use constrained delegation, where you would only specify specific services and systems, target systems, that token can be forwarded. Most, let's say, less security aware companies might just be too lazy to go through the effort to find all that out. It just works when you have unconstrained delegation, and that's beauty for the intruders. And Purple Knight finds this. I should actually say, Jason, I should add that Purple Knight, of course, runs as a normal user. You don't need to have a domain admin to figure this out. You're going to use your own Office account, not the admin account, because everybody by default has the permissions to read these permissions. And that's why the reconnaissance in AD is so easy, because of those default permissions, unless you lock them down. Yeah,
really interesting.
Hardly anybody does. I'll give you one more example, because we see this all the time, and it's just another easy one to misuse and to overlook. We're looking at a domain controller here, a domain controller, and the owner of the domain controller object. Yeah, and if that is not a domain admin, like, or the default administrator of the domain, again, just a synonym for a tier 0 administrator. If that's not one of them, what typically has happened is that the AD team needed a new server as a domain controller. Some other server management team provisioned it. Classic, shared workload in companies, like shared responsibilities. They provisioned it, and then they hand over that server to the domain admins. But they've already domain joined it through SCCM, through whatever mechanisms, even manually. And whoever joins it to the domain is the owner of that object. And then the domain admins aren't aware of that. They promote it to a domain controller. That's an act that you then do and can only do as a domain admin. But the owner remains to be that person that joined it to the domain. Yeah. So that's something that we see all the time. And again, an easy bridge for an intruder to capture that one account and then get to the domain controller. And then you are the domain controller. Once you have that permission as an owner, you can change the domain controller computer's account's password, and